The moment Thea Langdon saw her husband's name light up her phone screen, she almost didn't answer. She had been standing at baggage claim at O'Hare, rolling her neck from side to side, trying to work out the knot that 3 days of sleeping on a conference center mattress had put there. Her flight from Charlotte had landed 40 minutes late, which meant she'd missed the connection her assistant had booked, which meant she'd had to sweet-talk her way onto a standby list, which meant she was tired in a way that had moved past tired and into something that felt almost geological, settled, heavy. Her phone buzzed. Ryland across the screen, with the photo she'd taken of him 2 summers ago on the Cape. Squinting into the sun, looking like someone who had never told a single lie in his life, she answered. "Hey, babe." His voice was warm, unhurried, the voice of a man sitting in his own living room. "How was the flight?" "Long," she said. "There was a delay out of Charlotte. I just landed." "Oh, that's rough. Listen, I'm not going to be able to pick you up. I'm stuck at the office. Hendricks needs the Morrison brief by tomorrow morning, and we're basically building it from scratch. You know how it is." Thea knew how it was. She had been married to Ryland Beckett for 11 years. She knew exactly how it was. "Sure," she said. "I'll grab a cab. You're the best. I'll try not to wake you when I get in." He hung up before she could say anything else. Not that she'd had anything else to say. She stood there a moment with the phone in her hand. Around her, the carousel had started moving, suitcases emerging from the flap, like they were being born into the world. People surged forward. A child beside her shrieked with excitement at the sight of a bright orange bag. Thea watched the belt go around and thought, something is wrong. Not because of the call. The call was ordinary. Ryland working late was ordinary. What wasn't ordinary was the particular quality of his voice. That studied ease, like a musician hitting a note perfectly, but 1 beat too soon. She couldn't have explained it to anyone. She had just heard something in him that she recognized the way you recognize a smell before you can name it. She grabbed her bag and walked outside into the cold and got into the first cab she saw. Thea Langdon had not always been the kind of woman who noticed things like that. She'd been 29 when she met Ryland at a fundraiser her firm had organized for a children's literacy nonprofit. He was a corporate attorney at a downtown firm, broad-shouldered, articulate, the kind of man who made other people feel interesting when he talked to them. He had looked at her across a room full of people in expensive clothes and walked over like the distance between them was nothing. They dated for a year and a half. They got engaged in Tuscany. They married in October, in a ceremony that her mother cried through from beginning to end. Thea had thought, standing at that altar, that she understood what people meant when they talked about certainty, about landing. She had a career she loved. She was a senior consultant at a healthcare strategy firm, the kind of work that took her to conferences and hospital systems and boardrooms across the country. She was good at it. She liked being good at it. Ryland supported that, at least in the early years. He told people at parties about her projects with what seemed like genuine pride. Then things shifted. Slowly. The way water reshapes stone. You don't notice it while it's happening. He started making small comments. "Another trip?" said in a particular tone that made her feel guilty for being successful. "I barely see you anymore." As though the solution to that was for her to be smaller, to travel less, to need fewer things. She started apologizing for her schedule. Started rearranging her life to fit into the gaps of his. She could see that now. She hadn't been able to see it then. What she also hadn't seen, hadn't wanted to see maybe, were the signs that had been there all along. The nights he came home too late to be explained by the hours he claimed. The way his phone was always face down on every surface. The business trips that multiplied in the last 2 years. The conference in Dallas. The client retreat in Scottsdale. The team dinner in Chicago that had lasted until 2 in the morning. She had told herself she was overthinking. She was tired. She was traveling too much and reading too much into things. She was not the kind of woman who obsessed over her husband's phone. She had told herself that, and she had almost believed it. The cab dropped her at their house in Lincoln Park at 9:30. The house was dark except for the front porch light and the glow of the TV she could see through the living room window, which meant someone was home. Thea paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The TV light flickered. The neighborhood was quiet. Down the street, a dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. She thought about calling him back. She picked up her phone, found his name, put her phone away. She let herself in with her key. The living room was empty. The TV was on, some cable news program, and there was a half-empty glass of water on the coffee table and a throw blanket pushed to one side of the sofa. Someone had been sitting there. "Hello," she called. Nothing. She walked through to the kitchen. A pan on the stove, rinsed but not washed. 2 plates in the dish rack. 2 glasses. 2. Thea stood very still. She was not a dramatic person. She had never, even in her most anxious moments, gone looking for things. She had always believed that if something was happening, she would know. That 11 years of sharing a life with someone meant you couldn't be that surprised. She walked upstairs. The bedroom was empty. The bed was made. She had made it herself before she left for Charlotte, and nobody had slept in it since. The master bathroom. Her toiletries on her side, his on his, same as always. She went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at those 2 glasses in the dish rack and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not quite fear. Not quite certainty. More like the moment before weather arrives, when the air pressure changes and the birds go quiet. She picked up her phone and opened his location. They shared locations. Had for years. Practical thing, both of them traveled. It made sense. He was at their house. Except he wasn't. She looked at the screen. The little blue dot sat squarely on their address, as still and settled as a thumbtack. Then she understood. She had left her iCloud logged in on his laptop once. Months ago, when her phone had been charging, and she needed to check a document. He had never mentioned it. She had never thought about it. She walked to his home office and opened his laptop. Didn't even need a password. He'd set it to stay unlocked for 30 minutes. There was the Find My app, sitting open in a tab. Her own account still signed in. And there was her location, right where he'd put it to use. Charlotte, then O'Hare, then home. He had been watching her move. He hadn't just forgotten to log her out. He had kept her logged in. He had been tracking her. Thea sat down in his chair. She put her hands flat on the desk. The room was very quiet, and she was very calm. In the way that you are calm when something enormous has happened, and your body hasn't caught up yet. She thought about the 2 plates in the dish rack. She thought about the 2 glasses. She thought about the blanket pushed to one side of the sofa, the water glass still sitting there. She thought, he was here tonight, with someone. And when I called from baggage claim, he had just enough time. She didn't move for a long time. She did not confront him that night. This surprised her afterward. She had always imagined, in the abstract way you imagine things you hope will never happen, that she would be the kind of person who confronted things head on, who didn't wait, who said the hard thing the moment she understood it. Instead, she went upstairs, changed out of her clothes, got into bed, and lay there in the dark listening to the house settle around her. Ryland came home at 11:40. She heard the key in the door, the quiet of someone trying not to be heard, the creak of the 3rd stair. He came into the bedroom and stood in the doorway for a moment, and she could tell he was checking whether she was asleep. She kept her breathing even. He undressed in the dark, got into bed, was asleep in minutes. She lay beside him until 3 in the morning, looking at the ceiling, making decisions. By the time the room began to go gray with the first light, she had a plan. It wasn't an emotional plan. It wasn't built on anger, though the anger was there. She could feel it, low and constant, like a pilot light. It was a practical plan. Careful. The kind of plan she would make for a professional problem that required solving quietly. She had not told a single person about her mother's estate. Her mother, Genevieve Langdon, had died 2 years ago. 14 months into what turned out to be a relentless campaign of lung cancer that she had faced with a particular brand of dry humor that had characterized her entire life. She had left Thea the house in Michigan, the investment accounts, and the art collection she had spent 40 years quietly building. Together it came to just under $800,000. Thea had never mentioned it to Ryland, not the full amount. She had said there was a small inheritance, that her mother had left her some things, and then she had redirected every conversation away from the details. She wasn't sure why, at the time. Some instinct she hadn't been able to name. Lying in the dark listening to her husband breathe, she was grateful for that instinct. She had a friend from her graduate program, a woman named Quincy Aldridge, who had gone into family law and built a practice in Evanston that she was quietly, fiercely proud of. Thea had attended her firm's 10th anniversary party. They had coffee twice a year. Quincy was the sharpest person Thea knew. At 6 a.m., Thea sent her a text. Need to talk. Not urgent, but important. Are you free this week? Quincy responded at 6:04. Tomorrow noon. My office. Bring nothing you don't want him to find. She went to work as normal. She came home as normal. She made dinner and asked Ryland how the Morrison brief had gone, and listened to him explain the complexities of the case, with the fluency of someone who had been telling that particular story all day, and had it down cold. He was good at it. She had always known he was good at it. It was part of what she had loved about him. He was a gifted narrator. He understood that the best lies are the ones where you believe them yourself, at least a little. "You seem tired," he said over pasta. "I'm fine," she said. "The trip caught up with me." He nodded. He refilled her wine glass without asking. He told her about a movie he wanted to see that weekend. She smiled and said maybe, and cleared the plates, and washed the 2 glasses she'd found in the dish rack that she'd moved to the back of the cabinet, so he wouldn't notice they were gone. Quincy listened to everything without interrupting. She had a yellow legal pad on her desk, and she took notes in a fast, angular hand. And when Thea finished, she looked at the pad for a moment and then looked up. "You want to know where you stand?" "I want to know what smart looks like from here," Thea said. Quincy nodded slowly. "Okay. First question, the inheritance, is it in accounts solely in your name?" "Yes. It was always separate. He's never had access." "Good. Keep it that way. Do not move anything. Do not consolidate. Do not tell anyone else about it. Not your sister. Not your friends. Just me and you." She tapped the legal pad. "Second question. Do you have any documentation of the other person? Anything concrete?" 2 glasses in the dish rack. A blanket on the sofa. The location tracking. "That's not nothing," Quincy said. "But we'd want more if it came to a contested divorce. Not for you to go get. I want to be very clear about that. For the purposes of asset protection, it doesn't actually matter right now. What matters is making sure you're not disadvantaged before you're ready to move." "How long?" Thea asked. 3 to 6 weeks to get your paperwork in order. I want full disclosure documents on the marital assets, your accounts, his accounts as best you know them, property records. I'm going to file a protective order on the inheritance right now, just to create a clean paper trail showing separate property. After that, she paused. After that, you decide when. I want to be ready before I do anything, Thea said. I don't want to confront him and then scramble. Quincy looked at her with something that might have been admiration. Most people come in here furious. They want to blow it up and figure out the rest later. I was furious, Thea said. I'm done being furious. Now I just want to do this right. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of her life. She went to work. She came home. She made meals, watched television, had conversations, laughed at the appropriate moments. She slept beside a man she no longer recognized, or perhaps had never recognized the way she'd thought she did. And she was polite and warm and completely unreachable in some essential way that he didn't seem to notice. She noticed things, though. She started noticing everything. The way his phone went with him into the bathroom every single time. The way he angled his screen away from her when they were on the couch. The way he had developed, in the last year, a habit of leaving a room to take calls. Just getting better reception, babe. In a house where the reception was identical in every room. She thought about the red flags she'd overlooked. Not because cataloging them made her feel better, but because she wanted to be honest with herself about who she had been in this marriage. She had known, on some level. Not the specifics, not the who or the how long, but the shape of it. She had chosen repeatedly not to look directly at it. She had been so afraid of what knowing would cost her that she had made herself not know. She was done making herself not know. She found a therapist. A woman named Dr. Paulette Cruz, who worked out of a small office in Wicker Park, and who had a way of asking questions that felt like she was handing you a flashlight rather than shining it in your face. Thea went every Thursday at 7 in the morning, before work, and she did not tell Ryland. She talked about the marriage, the shape of what it had become, how she had, bit by bit, over the course of 11 years, filed herself down to fit into the life he wanted her to have, how she had told herself this was love. Partnership. Compromise. What would have happened, Doctor? Cruz asked one morning. If you hadn't filed yourself down, Thea thought about it. I would have been too much, she said. He always made me feel like I was too much. And do you think you are? Thea looked at the small print on the wall across from her. Some piece of abstract art in blues and yellows. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't answer immediately. She sat with the question. She let it have its full weight. No, she said finally. I don't. On a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks before Thea had planned to file, she flew to Cincinnati for a one-day strategy session with a hospital system she'd been consulting for. She was supposed to fly back that evening. The session ran long, and there was weather rolling in from the west, and her 6 p.m. flight was canceled. She got rebooked on the 8 a.m. the following morning. She texted Ryland. Flight canceled. Weather. Flying out first thing. Don't wait up. He texted back a thumbs-up emoji and a red heart. She booked a hotel near the airport and ordered room service, and called her sister in Portland, and talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. The easy rolling conversation of people who know each other well enough to say whatever they're actually thinking. She didn't mention Ryland. Not yet. She was reading in bed at 10:30 when her phone lit up. It was Ryland's name, she answered, already composing her face into calm. "Hey," he said, and then, "Sorry, wrong button," and the line went quiet but did not disconnect. She could hear background noise. A restaurant maybe, or a bar, music, low, the sound of other people's conversations blurring together. And then Ryland's voice, to someone who was not her. "Told you, she's gone until tomorrow. We have the whole night." Thea sat very still in her hotel bed, with the phone pressed to her ear. A woman's voice, light, pleased, saying something Thea couldn't quite make out. Ryland laughing. The particular laugh he used when he was charming someone. The one that sounded spontaneous but wasn't. Thea listened for 45 seconds. She did not breathe. Then she quietly ended the call. She set the phone down on the nightstand. She looked at the ceiling of the hotel room. The air conditioner hummed. She thought, there it is. Not as a revelation. Not with shock. More like confirmation. Like a test result coming back the way you already knew it would the moment you'd ordered it. She picked her phone back up and sent Quincy a text. Moved the filing date up. "I'm ready." She did not confront him when she got home. She had thought about it, in the hotel room in Cincinnati, whether she wanted the scene. The tears and the denials and the negotiating and the scene. She had thought about what it would feel like to look him in the eye and say I know and watch his face rearrange itself. She decided she didn't want it. She wanted something cleaner. On the Friday morning that the process server arrived at Ryland Beckett's downtown office with the divorce petition, Thea was at her own office, in a meeting about a hospital system restructuring in Tennessee. And she was thinking about the work instead of thinking about him, which felt like its own kind of statement. Her assistant knocked and said she had a call she might want to take. She excused herself. It was Ryland. "What is this?" he said. Not a question. His voice was very controlled, which meant he was not controlled at all. "It's divorce papers," she said. "Quincy Aldridge is handling my side. Her contact is on the cover sheet." "Thea, I've moved out," she said, which wasn't quite true yet. She had moved her most important things. Her documents, her laptop, the few pieces of jewelry that had been her mother's. "I'm staying at the Marriott on Michigan Ave for now." "You can't be serious." "I've never been less serious about anything in my life," she said, and then corrected herself. "I mean, I've never been more serious." There was a pause on the line. "We need to talk about this," he said. "Quincy Aldridge," she said again. "Her number is on the cover sheet." She hung up and went back into the meeting. The divorce took 7 months. It was not pleasant. Ryland hired a lawyer who specialized in making things complicated. And there were depositions and document requests, and a particularly ugly 3-week stretch in June, where everything felt like it was going to collapse. Quincy navigated all of it with the steady competence of someone who had done this 1,000 times and had no patience for theatrics. The inheritance stayed hers, clean and separate, exactly as she'd filed it. Ryland's attorney made a brief attempt to characterize it as marital property, and Quincy shut that down in one paragraph. The settlement they reached in October gave Thea the Michigan house, her mother's house, and her retirement accounts, and a clean split of the marital assets, which were fewer than Ryland had led her to believe, because as it turned out, he had been spending considerably more than his salary on a life that she had not been part of. Quincy had suspected this. She was not surprised. Ryland was not present at the signing. He sent his attorney. Thea sat at a long conference table in a building on LaSalle Street with Quincy beside her, and signed her name on a set of documents that meant she was, after 11 years, responsible only for herself. The pen was one of those heavy ones that sat in a holder in the center of the table, the kind of pen that made everything feel official. She signed the last page and set it down. Quincy squeezed her hand once, quickly, under the table, and Thea thought she might cry, but she didn't. She sat very straight in her chair in her good gray suit, and she looked at the stack of signed documents, and felt something she had not expected. She felt clear. The Michigan house needed work. It had been sitting mostly empty since her mother died. A 4-bedroom Victorian in a small town on the lake, with a kitchen that hadn't been updated since 1987, and a back porch that sagged at one end, and windows that rattled when the wind came off the water. It needed paint and new fixtures, and someone to look at the roof before winter. Thea drove up on a Friday evening in November, with the back seat of her car full of boxes, the radio on. The drive took 4 hours. She had a thermos of coffee and a bag of almonds and a podcast about the history of labor unions that she found oddly soothing. She pulled into the driveway just after dark. The house was exactly as she'd left it. Exactly as her mother had left it, really. That particular quality of a place that has been loved and is waiting. She sat in the car for a moment and looked at the front porch with the old wicker chairs and the outdoor light that her mother had always left on for her. Even when she was coming home from college at midnight, even when she was a grown adult who needed no such reassurance, she got out of the car and stood in the cold for a moment. The lake was invisible, but she could smell it. That particular mix of water and pine, and something mineral and cold that she'd been smelling since childhood. She went inside. She turned on the lights. She stood in her mother's kitchen and put the kettle on and looked around at the familiar walls and the familiar mess of potted herbs on the windowsill that she'd been watering by occasionally paying the neighbor's teenager, and thought, I am going to be okay. Not fine. Not fixed. Not starting over from zero in some glossy, cinematic way. Just okay. The real kind that doesn't need anything added to it. She made her tea and took it to the back porch, the saggy end, and sat in the cold under a sky shocking with stars. The kind of sky you forgot existed until you got far enough from the city, and she put her feet up on the railing and wrapped both hands around the mug. Somewhere out on the lake, something moved in the water. A duck, maybe, or a fish, turning in the dark. Thea Langdon sat in her mother's chair, in her mother's house that was now her house, and felt the night settle around her. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like room.